Hey guys, my name is Dice Rollin. Today we're going to be taking a look at a movie that launched an entire subgenre of horror called found footage. The Blair Witch Project was written and directed by Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick. It was released on July 30th, 1999. The premise is a few film students go to Maryland to make their documentary about the legend of the Blair Witch. The problem is the footage on their cameras is the only thing that is found later on. An original versus sequel treatment on the Blair Witch was requested by Becky Quaranda. I apologize for utterly slaughtering your name. So we're well on our way towards that. So without further ado, this is my review of the Blair Witch Project. The movie's barely even started and even the title's scared. We're given a little appetizer to the plot with an explanation that 3 student filmmakers had disappeared while trying to make a documentary. This is the footage that was found a year later on their camera. We're then introduced to these poor unfortunate souls. Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams. There's no need to tell you the actors' names because those are their names. Makes it easier to remember who you should be shouting for while you're having an existential crisis in the middle of the woods. During this introduction of the characters and what their plans are, it does make me grateful for the advances in technology that we've had. I mean, to do this, I don't need a cameraman or a boom operator. I just need a camera, 2 mics, a tripod, lights, a computer, a dead guy, and a pretty face. While interviewing locals about the Blair Witch, a few different stories about the legend are told, but they all seem to summarize in the same way, which is that most people won't go near the woods where the witch supposedly resides. There's also the concept that several children had gone missing because of her. Just to get some further detail on the Blair Witch, the group tracks down the local crazy cat lady, minus the cats, played by Patricia DeCow, to record her close encounter.
There was hair on her body like a
So she was hairy from head to toe?
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, if the Blair Witch decides to come out of the woods, she could make a fortune doing Nair commercials. That or this lady saw Bigfoot instead. So with that, Heather, Mike, and Josh go to their motel room to rest up for the next day, where they will trek into some supposedly haunted woods. But first...
Pour me a shot, please.
Oh,
I'm freaking out.
You can't do that.
Okay, I think by now we all know that there are some rules that go along with horror. So far, these 3 have decided to investigate a terrifying legend that has been around for hundreds of years, gotten some historical stories from locals to back that up. They're planning on camping in the woods that very witch is said to live. And now, they're drinking! They're already fucked. This is just overachieving at this point. So, as I said, the next morning they head off to hike through the woods to do some on-site filming. But first, they interview some fishermen, one of which doesn't believe a damn bit of this Blair Witch legend, while the older gentleman insists that it's real, and that he saw a strange, unexplainable mist with his own eyes. He's essentially playing the role that we see in a number of horror movies. After this red flag, the 3 filmmakers reach their first destination, being a lovely sunning spot called Coffin Rock. Apparently, this was where 5 men were found in Hannibal-style formation with odd symbols carved into their faces, and missing their intestines. The trappers who found this grisly art brought authorities back, but the bodies were gone. Like someone had taken them away really, really fast. And let me tell ya, lugging around 1 dead body is difficult enough, much less 5. So props to the witch. But never mind that, it's time to set up the tent for the night. The group seems to have a pretty peaceful night's sleep, until morning when Josh informs his travel companions that during the night he heard some cackling in the distance. I can only imagine that said cackling was the Blair Witch feeling pretty damn good about her chances of getting a few meals. Because not only do Heather, Josh, and Mike find this mildly interesting, but continue on to their next location, instead of packing up all their shit and hauling ass back to the car. You see, if I were in their shoes, it would have gone down a little differently. Nope. 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 Hell no. Hell no. We're treated to a brief explanation of Mike's chest hair bald patterns. They're man nipples, Susan, calm down. Before we continue along with our main characters to their second filming location. However, a problem is starting to develop as Josh and Mike are beginning to doubt Heather's navigation abilities. So they hike further into the woods until they stumble upon something truly odd.
Whoa. What is this?
Rocks! Rocks? Granted, this wouldn't exactly be a pivotal discovery normally, but these particular rocks seem to be purposefully stacked for no apparent reason. But if they were smart and paid attention, which is a lot to ask from horror movie characters, I know, they'd note that according to the man they'd interviewed in the town, there were 7 victims. And here, there are 7 piles of rocks. That night, after a delightful meal of Vienna sausage, they returned to the rocks to film them. Again, because aesthetic. However, while making sure to get just the right angle on the rock piles, Josh fucks up.
You didn't just knock that over. Please tell me you didn't just knock that over. Can't be too careful.
Josh, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that it's probably a very bad thing that you messed with a witch's rock collection. Just to prove my point, sometime during the night, our protagonists are woken up by the sound of strange footsteps and noises around them in the darkness. It seems a little bit of a step down from malevolent cackling, but who am I to judge? Of course, nothing is found, so by morning, they all speculate on what could have possibly been making those sounds, and why Heather has to record everything. I can tell you exactly why. For the views. Well, as long as they don't find a dead body, I'm sure they'll be fine.
Bugs me out is that we're so damn deep in the woods, and people are gonna try and come out here and mess with us, then they gotta have something wrong with them, and I'm not gonna play with that.
Mike has a very good point here, but since we've already established that they're all up shit creek by now, it's no surprise that their exhaustive efforts to get back to the car are getting them nowhere. Plus, Josh and Mike aren't exactly gaining confidence in Heather's guidance. With no car in sight, it's time once again to camp for the night. Unfortunately for them, it seems that whatever was making those strange sounds last night has followed them. But, unlike last time, they wake up to find evidence that there was indeed something nearby, that most likely wasn't any animal.
Woke up this morning, just like 2 seconds ago, and there are piles of rocks outside of our tent.
Even worse than that, the map has mysteriously disappeared. This causes the tension among the group to escalate further, which eventually comes to a head when it's revealed what really happened to the map.
I kicked that fucker into the creek!
You're an idiot.
There's a tiny bit of a throwdown before they continue on in total distrust of one another. On the way, they find some literal stick figures. I can only assume at this point that the Blair Witch just has a lot of time on her hands and is very into arts and crafts.
Come up here quick! I need to use the CP!
Okay, ego. There's a little bit more insanity from Mike before, you guessed it, they have to set up camp again for the night. On the bright side, things really amp up this time. Now normally I would say that leaving your shelter to run out into complete darkness is a very poor choice. But in this particular case, I guess it was a wise decision, as whatever was fucking with them doesn't find them, and they survive till morning. Unfortunately, their possessions and tent aren't so lucky. Which means that the situation has gone from, well, this isn't good, to holy shit, we're fucked. Naturally, their mental fortitude is running a little dry as well. It certainly doesn't help when the next twist is actually a circle. More accurately, that they appear to have been going in a circle despite the fact that they have been hiking south the entire time. And now it's time for Josh to have a mental break.
No one here to help you. We walked for 15 hours today. We ended up in the same place. There's no one here to help you. That's your motivation.
Wow, Josh can really be a dick. But that's okay, because at some point that night he just up and disappears. Bad news is, he didn't take his pack with him, so it's more weight to carry for Heather and Josh. To mix things up a bit, they head east since south didn't work out. As I'm sure you've guessed at this point, Mike and Heather are forced to camp again. And this time, they hear Josh out there in the darkness. Josh? What's your problem, man? You're making it sound like you're being horrendously torn to pieces by the very nightmarish legend that has been stalking us. There's no sign of Josh though, at least until morning when Heather finds a bundle of sticks with remnants of Josh. No need to mention that to Mike though, I guess. But now, Heather has sincerely begun to understand just how fucked she and Mike are. So, she decides to leave a message for their parents to find. Thus, we get the most frequently used image and parodied scene in semi-recent horror history. Moving on from that, she and Mike once again hear Josh calling out. So, logically, they race towards the familiar voice even though they're pretty damn sure it's not actually Josh they hear. 'Cause why not? We know they're gonna die eventually, so why not just run headlong directly into the arms of a murderous witch? They find an abandoned house out of quite literally nowhere though. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but this baby can hold so many dead bodies. Heather and Mike head right on inside to try to find Josh, but all they do find is general destruction and overgrowth. Oh, and some child-sized handprints decorating the walls. Despite all of this, Mike has completely thrown logic aside, because he can still hear Josh somewhere in the house. His hysterical running up and down the stairs separates him from Heather. Oh, there he is! And there, in the basement of a decrepit old house in the middle of nowhere, the Blair Witch finally gets her hands on the remainder of our heroes. With that, the movie ends and the credits roll. Speaking on the plot of the Blair Witch Project, I can certainly appreciate the concept of building up dread in your own mind through stories and subtly creepy occurrences. It allows the viewer to rely more heavily on their own imagination to come up with what horrific things could happen. At the same time, I think we were left a little too much to our own mental creativity. If something a little more than sticks and stones were shown, it probably would have given the audience more to be scared of. However, there is a lot of history and backstory of the Blair Witch provided on the official website, which was used as part of the marketing for the movie. If you were unaware of the site's existence, then you likely missed out on a lot of what made the movie scary. So it's both an advantage and a disadvantage in that way. There's a scant bit of music by Samuel A. Ward that's more on the subtle side to go along with the real-life feeling of the whole thing. Can't fault that, and I can't really look too deeply into it. The actors did a solid job of playing their parts, which I feel weren't too far from themselves if they were in the main character's shoes. Apparently they were allowed to improvise a majority, if not all, of their lines. This is good in that it makes it feel more like actual found footage, and like we're getting raw reactions to what's happening. However, it's not so good in that you know they didn't have a script of dialogue to work with. All in all, they each did a good job of losing their minds and screaming their lungs out. What can I say about the look of this film? It did what it was meant to do. It was obviously quite effective too, given how many found footage style horror films have followed in its footsteps. It helps that the actors were primarily the ones doing the filming. It feels very normal in the aesthetic and feel. With all that being said, I am giving the Blair Witch Project 7 out of 10 bloody thumbs up. The thing is, I actually remember little bits and pieces of this from when I stumbled across it on TV many years ago. I can't remember a damn thing about anything that happened before the climax. But I do remember the image of Mike standing in the corner. Something about that, combined with Heather's frantic screaming, was burned into my mind, as well as a distinct sense of dread. After giving it a proper watch, I ended up liking it more than I thought I would. I feel like a lot of its scare factor was lost once word got around that this wasn't really real. Though I can see why a lot of people find this to be the most terrifying horror movie of the 90s. I understand and appreciate the whole low budgetness of the film. It definitely has its flaws, and it is not everyone's cup of tea. And that's fine. It's still a solid piece of horror history, having laid the groundwork for an entire subgenre of horror, both good and bad. There's not a hint of Hollywood polish anywhere in this film, and that's a good thing. It's dirty, unfiltered, creepy, and will make you think twice about venturing out to the woods anytime soon. I would recommend the Blair Witch Project to fans of found footage films, and those who don't get motion sickness, witch enthusiasts, and anyone who enjoys some horror where you have to fill in the blanks yourself. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like to let me know. Don't forget to leave a comment down below telling me what you thought of this movie, and if you have any suggestions for horror movies you'd like to see me review in the future. You can support the channel through my Patreon, where you can also get early access to videos like this. Also, don't forget to share this video to help the channel grow, and subscribe for more videos. goes like this. See you later.
I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.